So mainly I am interested in how different promotional public relations activities influence gender stereotypes, how they influence our understanding of truth, how they influence mainly our knowledge building processes. So my name is Michal Chmiel. I'm the course leader for BA Public Relations and senior lecturer in public relations for the MA students. I'm interested in public relations, decision making and social psychology, as originally I'm a social psychologist. I have a PhD in social psychology, and my main project was focused on understanding how different linguistic content may influence we make decisions, and how those different linguistic categories in turn influence different public relations messages. So I first started in public relations professionally working for Procter & Gamble in Poland, and probably one of the few males responsible for brand public relations of women intimate hygiene products. So now I know quite a few things about pads, panty liners and tampons. So mainly I am interested in how different promotional public relations activities influence gender stereotypes, how they influence our understanding of truth, how they influence mainly our knowledge building processes. My other line of research is connected to fake news. As a psychologist, I'm trying to understand how different psychological factors might contribute to understanding why people share or spread news they already know are faked. One of the reasons I found very interesting in one of my experiments conducted last year was a trait which is called collective narcissism. It's a very interesting psychological factor explaining why overtly we may support in-groups, by covertly we may feel ashamed of them. And this factor itself may, for example, influence the extent to which we will share fake news. Fake news, for example, about vaccines or different conspiracy theories. So the project I've been currently working on is I will be actually presenting in a couple of days in Black during the one of the most important public relations conferences globally. The project is called Autocracy of Truth. It's aimed at understanding how different definitions of truth actually influence our understanding of building trust among different parties. Let's say, for example, you're the wife of a president of the United States and you are interested in if your husband was faithful to you. Now, was he engaged in any sexual relationship with his co-worker? Now, for you, defining this truth is pretty straightforward. It's not any kind of negotiation of power. It's not the negotiation of different definitions. For you, you're basically interested whether your husband had sex with that particular woman. From a sociological point of view, definitions of truth may be difficult to establish. There is something that is called the regime of truth, and it's always very frequently negotiable. Now, from my perspective, a psychological one, the definition of truth is much more straightforward, and it's much more based on evidence that is given, and it's much more related to actual events. So this is not some kind of a negotiation of power. So I'm now using this metaphor of a relationship between two partners in any intimate relationship to understand how truth is meaningful to establish trust as a prerequisite for a relationship between different stakeholders, between government and society, between organization and its consumers, between a brand and users of that brand. For example, recently there has been a crisis in understanding to what extent some brands in the UK too have contributed to polluting the environment with plastic. Now they, for example, refrain from directly including the information about using plastic in their products. From a psychological standpoint, for any given consumer, it's quite useful to understand whether any given product has a plastic ingredient in it or not. And establishing whether this plastic ingredient is present or not would ultimately influence the buying decision or the subsequent user decision. So I'm just trying to argue in my research project that adopting my psychological perspective for understanding truth and understanding to what extent this very truth contributes to understanding how trust is built among different parties is actually critical to having a positive influence on the society, because the implication, like with the using of plastic ingredient in different everyday use products, is actually critical to the well-being of this planet. My main tagline is the psychologist responsible for public relations. So I'm trying to squeeze the psychological element into current public relations theorizing as it is reflected in my teaching on my BA course. That is, each of my students is equipped with basic psychological skills like attitude formation, knowledge formation, stereotype forming, and how those contribute to more advanced processes like group level processes or societal processes. It's essentially about understanding to what extent human mind may interact in any social circumstances to produce any new knowledge, to produce any new decision, or to influence, for example, a buying decision, or to influence a voting decision. So anything from Brexit to buying a toothpaste would be in the scope of my interest and is in the scope of interest of our students who are now being taught about basic psychological processes responsible, for example, for decision making.